Alright, listen up, because Iansan is about to be dropped into the game and she's got one rule: keep moving or get weak. That's right, she's basically your in-game personal trainer, and if you're standing still, she's not going to be giving you those sweet buffs. Her Night Soul system is all about movement. You have high Night Soul, she's going to give you big buff, and low Night Soul, you might be as well as lifting a pool noodle. And before you ask, yes, she is a 4-star, and yes, she's going to be competing with that guy, Bennett, but we'll get to that later. For now, let's talk about how to keep her Night Soul gauge top up and why you should care. Marissa and Iansan is basically going to be on the first phase, which many of us are excited. So if you're planning to swipe for pooling, then don't forget to check out Loot Bar. If you know me, I've been recommending you guys Loot Bar before, since you can always save almost a 23% on all of your top-ups, with over 100,000 orders and so many good reviews at this point. And by the way, this also applies to PS5 and Xbox user who can place orders through Loot Bar. You can be sure that Loot Bar is trustworthy. Here you can see my order receipts of all of my top-ups that I have done. So guys, be sure to check out Loot Bar through the link in my description, as it can be a great way for you to save your money, especially if you are topping up a large amount. So basically, regarding Iansan's skill and kit, her normal attack, most of the time you're not going to be needing to carry too much, apart from kind of like her enhanced charge attack, where if you're in her Night Soul state, her charge attack turns into Swift Stormflight, which while still you're probably not going to be caring too much about her personal damage, but this does affect a bit of her passive later on that we're going to be discussing. Her E skill should basically quickly dash forward, dealing electro damage while also restoring her Night Soul point. This is where you're going to be activating her Night Soul blessing state. That allows her to do a number of different thing, including letting her to sprint on water, which is really interesting, and also yes, allow her to use Swift Stormflight from her charge attack. Now the most important thing about her kit is definitely starts to touch on her elemental burst. But first, she's gonna do a big AoE electro smackdown, and then afterward drops you a kinetic energy skill, which is basically a floating attack buff machine that follows your active character, kind of like a gym coach yelling at you to move faster. Now this attack buff skill differently based on how much Night Soul point that she has. If you have low Night Soul point of under basically a 42 Night Soul point, then the buff will scale off of the Night Soul point plus her attack. Now if her Night Soul point is above 42, then it only solely scale with Iansan's attack. Now what's important about this though is that the skill will actually lock the distance of your current active character to restore Night Soul point to Iansan. So basically it is best that your active character move as much as possible. And also another small catch is that if you do leave the combat for more than a second, the skill will automatically disappear. Iansan's first passive talent, basically this is where I mentioned before the Swift Stormflight of her charge attack during her Night Soul blessing state should be used, because it allows her to get the precise movement effect, where shot she will get more attack increase as well as faster Night Soul point gain, which is definitely important part of her kit. Iansan's second passive talent happens when a nearby party member triggers a Night Soul burst. After that, Iansan will now heal your active party member once every 2.8 seconds. And so basically Iansan's whole kit is revolving around movement, right? You run around, you dodge, you dash, whatever it is, do cartwheels if you have to. The more you move, the more Night Soul point that you will gain, which means stronger attack buff. That's why characters like Kinich, Chaska, Mavuika absolutely love her, because these characters basically never stand still. If your main DPS is kind of like a statue, like your Miya, if you're still using her, then yeah, Iansan might not be a fit. Now moving on to a bit of Iansan's build. When it comes to artifact set, well, Synergies set is definitely going to be the best set for her, unless, well, there are other character on your team who's already using it. For example, if you have like Mavuika or Sitlali, or you know, if you're having a Shilonen on Iansan team, then you might have to settle for another artifact set, which is maybe a Noblesse Oblige set, which of course has a team-wide attack boost after you use your elemental burst, so basically similar to how Bennett is using. So basically a safe option if your team already has a Cinder City set user. For start priorities, basically everything is going to be attack percentage, and for substats, attack percentage again is the highest priority, then energy regen until you have roughly around 140 to 150 energy regen on her, and then finally crit ratio if you're looking for a hybrid build, though yeah, we're not going to be focusing on that too much because most of Iansan build is going to be around a supportive build. Now, for her specific weapon, Iansan is all about attack buff, so naturally her best weapon would be a weapon that boosts attack or energy recharge. So if you're looking into a free-to-play options, then the Favonius Lance is technically going to be the MVP. It solves her energy issues, generate extra particles for your team, and all around very comfy options for Iansan. Other than that, we have the Ohanashi event weapon that hopefully you guys do have. It also a solid free-to-play options that you can use. It works well in teams where energy recharge isn't too much of a huge issue. Other than that, the Moon Piercer, though it only works mostly on a Dendro team, but it does give you an attack percentage buff when triggered Dendro reactions. So overall, it is a decent option that you can look into when you're using on an aggravate team. Other than that, for the 5-star options, yeah, it's only going to be good if you have 5-star options to spare. You know, like the Engulfing Lightning, pretty decent option for Iansan, which helps to solve her energy issues a bit. Skyward Spine, also decent, and if you're looking into specific attack percentage buff, then Calamity Queller is a very decent choice. When it comes to energy management, if your Iansan is the solo Electro user and she's not using a Favonius Lance, then you would need to have roughly around 160 to 180% energy recharge to be consistent. If your team have a double Electro user, then it's going to be around 140 to 150 ER. However, if you are using a Fab Lance, then she only needs around 120 to 130 ER. So basically what this is saying is that as long as you have a Favonius Lance used on her, you don't really have to care about energy regen. Now, we know that Iansan requires you to kind of move around a lot. So let's talk a bit about how to actually move efficiently during combat. And no, obviously it's not about running in circles like a headless chicken, as it doesn't count. But whenever you're using Iansan, you can look into dash cancelling, right? Characters like Alekino and Kuchin can weave in dash cancel between their attack to keep the Night Soul regeneration on Iansan to be high. Animation cancelling, like Utah player, you guys already know this, you cancel long attack animation with either dash or jumps to maintain fluidity and keep Iansan's buff rolling. Now, when it comes to Iansan's Constellation, this is kind of a big deal if we look into it. So first off, we have C1, which basically is that every 6 Night Soul point that was burned, she will restore 15 energy. Therefore, she's way easier to manage in rotation and doesn't need as much energy regen. C2 is a pretty big breakpoint because it adds a 30% attack, pushing her buff closer to Bennett's level. If you're serious about using Iansan, this is probably the first constellation that you want to aim toward Iansan. C4 basically increases the duration and the management of her buff easier, which can make her rotation feels a lot smoother. But then the biggest constellation and the most important cons of all is the C6, because it now extends Iansan's buff to roughly a 15 second, putting her basically on par with Bennett's uptime. And there's more than that, because now whenever she overfills her Night Soul, your current active member damage is increased by a 25%, making her basically an S tier support at that point. So overall, yes, if you're playing Iansan at a C0 level, she is still functional, but you will feel a difference at a C2. And whenever you're looking into a competition within Bennett and Iansan, she kinda have to be at a C6 level for it to be basically competitive. Now let's have a bit of a look into Iansan's team building, where there's good news and bad news. Where the good news is that she is pretty flexible in team building, but the bad news is that it is not too flexible, and if your team is allergic to movement, she is not going to be doing much. So yes, not every team would want her, but the one that's do is basically chef kiss. So here's some of the team comps that she can truly shines in. For example, Overload teams with perfect synergy with Clarence, Alekino, and Chaska. Plunging attack teams, she works pretty well with Veressa. And as for Xiao, he kinda still prefers Bennett. So it's mostly only gonna be Veressa at the current point. Melt team, she will be able to work really well with Mavuika, of course. And if you're still using Ganyu, she will also be able to buff Ganyu's damage decently. Other than that, interestingly, she can be on a physical team because of course she is is an electro character. So team with Eula, for example, we can bring her a bit back, which is kind of nice. And other than that, whenever it comes to Abyss team building, Iansan is a really nice addition because again, even though she can be a bit competitive toward Bennett at times, but overall, if we have kind of like a copy of Bennett, then yes, of course, now two of your teams on the Abyss finally have a really nice buffer for your teams. Now, whenever Iansan come, I would definitely have a separate specific team building for Iansan, but currently here are a couple of teams that I have cooked up a bit with Iansan and their rotation. So first off, we have a Mavuika team with Iansan, Bennett, as well as a Cryo Applicator. This will most likely be a Sitlali, but of course, if you're using character like Rosaria and Kaya, they will still be fine. Now this team works because obviously Mavuika is basically a Beyblade, right? She never stops moving and spinning. And this team is kind of a bit expensive if you're trying to use in the Abyss because we are having another Bennett here as well, right? We're going to be having a lot of attack buffing for this specific Mavuika team, but overall this might be shaping up to be a very decent Mavuika team whenever Iansan comes out. Other than that, we have a Cloran team with Iansan, Chevreuse, and another Pyro sub DPS, you know, like either Shanling or Mavuika, right? Because Cloran launch attack keeps her constantly moving, keeping Iansan's buff at a max power. Chevreuse, yes, she is recommended to be, you know, if she's at the C6, that's very good, but overall we already know how powerful of a character Chevreuse is if we're using her on an overload team. Then finally Mavuika, right? She can both be a DPS and of course in this case she is a sub DPS that help buff Cloran damage to the next level, and as well as having that off-field power application for Cloran to deal overload. Touching on an interesting team that we've mentioned before, which is a physical Eula team with Iansan, Fischl, and a Cryo Battery. That can be either, you know, Diona or Rosaria. These characters are still pretty decent as a Cryo Battery for a specific Eula team. It's been a while since we've used Eula, so I'm a bit interested to actually test this team out to see how much of a difference Iansan can make compared to Bennett. Because the thing is with Bennett again is that he is technically a circle impact character, and Eula kind of tend to move around a bit much, especially if she's dealing with a group situation enemies. Now if you're up with a single target, then Eula isn't too much of a problem, but yeah, whenever we are free of circle impact at times, it can be a pretty fun thing. Other than that, we have an Alhaitham team with Iansan, Nahida, and Fischl. For Alhaitham, skill and burst does keep him moving, so it's a perfect thing for Iansan to keep up her buff. Then overall, it is once again just basically a aggravate Alhaitham team. But the good thing is that before, many of the time we don't have a Bennett on Alhaitham team. Now that Iansan is an electro character, we have a decently nice buffer for Alhaitham team overall. So I'm excited to see how much of a difference this team will make. And other than that, if you're still using a Ganyu as we've mentioned, Iansan can potentially be a decent character on a Ganyu team with, you know, Ganyu, Iansan, Mavuika, and Shilonen. Obviously, if we do have a Bennett here, that would allow Ganyu to have a Pyro resistance increase. But while swapping Iansan with Bennett, first of all, does allow your Bennett to be on another team building, but after all, Iansan is a character that wouldn't restrict Ganyu too much into a circle impact kind of gameplay, because especially Ganyu without a shield does require her to dodge quite a lot. So many of the time, even though she is a charge attack character, we can find her being out of Bennett's circle at times, which can always have been a bit of an annoyance. And so we've mentioned quite a lot about Iansan and Bennett, but obviously there are and have been questions of you guys wondering how Iansan and Bennett will be whenever they are competing with each other. And there have been questions where you guys have wondered, can she actually replace the Bennett? And the answer is probably going to be a kinda. Because if we look into an attack buffing kind of showdown, then Bennett buff is bigger and technically always active as long as you're inside his burst circle. Whereas Iansan buff is definitely more conditional, as you are required to be moving quite a lot in order for her to get a maximum power. But here's the thing, if you hit a C2, then Iansan's buff actually gets pretty close. Bennett's talent level 13 buff is around 1210 attack, whereas Iansan's max buff as a C2 is 1050 attack. However, here's some of the reasons why you might want Iansan instead, because now you can finally have two buffing support characters without having to fight over Bennett, which is first of all. But if you have a team that's all about movement, she actually works better than Bennett. But obviously you don't have to stand in one place where Bennett burst local impact has always been technically kind of a problem, but then obviously if your team character doesn't move a lot, then her buff is straight up worse. And moreover, she doesn't actually generate energy like Bennett does. So if your team character that needs a battery, you know, like Xiangling for example, then Iansan is not too much of a help. So with all the things that we've just discussed about Iansan, let's look into her specific strengths and weaknesses. So Iansan isn't just another support, she's the support for movement heavy teams. If you're tired of being glued to Bennett burst circle, then yeah, she's kind of like a golden ticket to your freedom. She has strong synergy with high movement DPS character, you know, like character like Kinich, Mavuika and Clara. They would love her because they move around a lot, and even some plunging attack unit like Varesa can make really good use of Iansan's buff. Other than that, she frees up your Bennett for other team, which is great. Again, a similar situation to what Xingqiu and Yelan. So now you don't have to wonder how you're going to be using your Bennett, especially in the Abyss. And obviously, she also has access to healing, though obviously her healing is not going to be that much, so we won't be expecting her to replace a specific healer on your team, but you can think of it like a bonus feature and not a selling point. But then of course, as we know, she's not perfect because she's not good for stationary DPS. For character that stands still a lot like your Mia for example, then Iansan is not going to be too much of a help. There is going to be a bit of an energy issues on Iansan if you're not using a Favonius Lance on her, where unlike Bennett, who's pretty much an energy generating machine, Iansan does need help with her burst uptime. So obviously the Fab Lance does fix it for her. So overall, just give that to her and we'll call it a day. Other than that, she is technically Constellation reliant. At the C0 she's okay, but C2 is where it makes her more viable, and obviously C6 just makes her insane, where technically it unlocks her maximum power of course, because you know, anything before C6 just makes her feel a little bit lackluster. So especially if you are a free to play or low spender and you don't have a C6 Iansan at the current point, she would feel quite a bit weaker compared to simply a C1 Bennett. Other than that, even though Electro character have access to a number of different teams, however, she doesn't fit into every team. Where Overload teams, she does great. She's also amazing in Melt. However, in Electro Charge team at this point, it's not going to be so much of a good team for her. So we're going to be having a lot more team testing whenever Iansan comes out. So overall, we've already know a lot about Iansan at this point. Hopefully you guys have been able to follow with it. Now let's look into whether or not she's actually going to be worth pulling, because while it is once again an investment for your account, as you do have to spend your Primogems to at least pull on Iansan's banner, which may or may not be a good thing for you because you know, you might not like the specific 5-star character on the banner right now. So one of the biggest thing for Iansan is that she's going to be having a good value if you're having stuck a bit with only having a Bennett as a good support character for your account, especially when it comes to the Abyss, where many of the time 2 of your team does really want to have good attacking buffer, so that's going to be really good. Other than that, you have very high movement dependent DPS unit that really hate Bennett, Soko Impact, once again Cloran, Mavuika, Kinish, those kind of characters. And other than that, you love Overload and Melt team comps for example, then yes, she would also be good. And then you can consider skipping her if, well, obviously you already have Bennett and many of your team comps doesn't really struggle with a support character. Other than that, obviously if your DPS character stands still a lot, then yeah, again, you can just stick with a Bennett and call it a day, because yes, C1 Bennett just basically does everything for you already. And moreover, if you don't have the resources to actually spend on an Iansan constellation at this point in time, then that's definitely going to be a huge downside of Iansan, and with a huge consideration exclamation mark for you to be thinking about whether or not to pull. Because technically speaking, there are so many good supportive characters out there at this current point as well. You know, even Mavuika is on that list, you know, Sitlali, Shilonen, even Furina at this point in time. She's still up as the moment I post this video. Those are really huge consideration for you guys to be looking into. So obviously we would have to wait until Iansan official release and a bit of a time more for everyone, you know, the players, the TC, content creators, to test her specifically out, to understand more about her. But for right now, what I'm seeing is that Iansan is going to be an absolutely fantastic niche support character, and her future could be even brighter with, you know, for example, Not Cry on the horizon and more movement heavy character likely becoming. Her stock might even skyrocket. So if hold your words, keep pushing fast-paced combat, she could become one of the best attack buffer in the game. So for now, if you've got the right team, she may be worth investing in, but if not, you're probably better off saving your Primogems. So I think that's everything I have to say about Iansan at this point in time, guys. If you have any questions, leave it down in the comment section and I or some other lovely Genshin player will be getting to you there. If you're new to the channel, guys, don't forget to subscribe to the channel to not miss out on my future Genshin Impact videos. I really appreciate you guys staying with me till this part of the video, guys, and with that, I wish you a super day, and I'll catch you on my next video.